Hello everyone and welcome back to Video Editing 1 with Professor Harris. Today we're going to be going through Lesson 5, Refining the Sequence. So whether working on creative writing or visual storytelling projects, both share a similar process for getting ideas out of your head, however rough or messy they may be, and then molding them until they're ready for an audience. The pivot from development to refinement is essential in both mediums. This happens on a macro level with a film and at a micro level with every sequence and scene. So the real editing work kicks in as you refine the rough cut. In this lesson, you'll improve your sequence by removing or replacing unwanted material, dividing segments, reordering shots, and then trimming clips to improve pacing. I have a few other goals for this lesson, and I'm going to pull them up now. We're going to be reordering shots with the Extract and Splice In segment tool. We did a little bit of that in the last lesson, but we'll keep going here. Adjust narration pacing with the Lift and Overwrite segment tool. Replace shots in the sequence. Audition the alternative shots. Delete unwanted segments. Divide segments with Add Edit. Remove content with Trim tools. And improve sequence pacing with Trim tools. For your reference, we are back in the Rock Climber project, so we will be working in this one for this lesson as well. So let's get into moving segments in the timeline. Now that you edited a rough cut, let's look at how you can refine it by moving, rearranging, replacing, and deleting segments in the sequence. So rearranging video segments. When cutting a montage, you'll likely change the shot order as you explore various creative options. Even when cutting other program types, you may decide to move a shot or series of shots from one location to another within your sequence. So far you've used the segment tools to add clips to a sequence. Now you use them to easily move or remove segments you cut into the timeline. To rearrange clips, you'll use the yellow extract/splice in function shown here. We are going to use this bad boy. Alternatively, we've got it active now, right? Now we have it active because it's highlighted. We'll deactivate the trim tool. Now we have it activated. And it's going to be yellow no matter what side we're on. We can switch it over. We can make it a smart tool by selecting both of these, and then boom, making sure when we are in the timeline and when this is active that we are set on the lower portion. Cool. All right, so to rearrange a clip, you're literally going to make sure your audio and your video tracks are selected. So we can see these are lined up. So you can just grab this and you can literally just move it around. And when you move it, with the yellow color coding indicates that this tool shares a functionality with the Splice In edit button. So when you're moving a segment with Extract and Splice In, Media Composer inserts the segment wherever you drop it, just like the Splice In edit. And then it closes the gap created at the clip's original timeline position, just like the Extract edit. So let's go ahead and put this, let's set right here. We'll just drop it. Boom. Now we've moved it, and or did we move it? I might have left it in the same exact place that I started. I'll move it somewhere else. We'll go this way. We'll drop it right here, or we'll drop it over yonder. We'll drop it where we can't see it. How about that? Yeah, we'll put it at the beginning. Why not? So there we go. If we wanted to move other segments, we could do the same thing. We can see that the sync has been broken on some of these shots because I was goofing around last time, but we can do the same thing. We can move this shot anywhere we want in the timeline. This doesn't have an associated audio file, which is why it's not coming up when I click on this, or if it is, it might be on one of these other lower tracks. So just keep in mind track selectors when you are dragging around shots. If you're rearranging a montage that has music over it, you might say, I don't need to worry about moving any of the audio because audio is set by itself. I can just be rearranging these shots to whatever order I like. And then you get it where you want it. Yeah, so all kinds of customizable options there. Let me undo everything I just did because I don't actually want to destroy this project. I want to leave it as God intended. All right, moving on. Let's move on now to working with 4-frame displays. So what if we want to be a little more precise? So if you look here, when I drag this around, the composer window, which contains the source monitor and the record monitor, goes blank. I can't actually see where I'm dropping this video. So if I drop it, it's kind of a toss-up. Well, there's a way to change this, and we can set this up to 4-frame display. We talked about 4-frame display, I think, in lesson 2. and it has made its return here. Let's look at how to enable 4-frame display when dragging with the splice in. So we'll go to right-click on the timeline window, and we'll go to Settings, Timeline Settings. And then under Display, the Display tab, we can change this to Display during segment drag 4 frames. And then we'll click OK. So now when I click on this walking clip and I start to drag, the display changes. So now we see 4 frames, and it's pretty intuitive, but I'm going to explain it to you now. So the far left frame is the last frame before the edit point you'll create if I dropped this segment that I'm dragging. So that far left frame there is of the hand sliding along the wall. If I let go, that will be the last frame of the video before this walking clip that I'm dragging lands. The middle left frame is the first frame of the shot that I'm dragging. The right frame, the middle right frame, is the last shot of the clip that I'm dragging. And the far right frame is the first frame after the segment I'm dragging if I dropped it at the current location or any location. So I am essentially using this splice in drag here to interrupt this walking shot. And I can see what will be the first frame if I let go and what will be the last frame if I let go. And we've also got the first frame and last frame of the video I'm actually dragging. So I'll go ahead and just drop this anywhere. We'll drop it, I don't know, something like right here. And so now I've moved it somewhere else in the timeline. I'm sure things aren't going to make sense anymore. I'll undo this. But for your reference, again, if you don't want to be dragging things around blindly and rearranging clips in your timeline, you can access and activate this right here in the timeline settings window. So I'm going to turn it off for now because, well, no, I'll leave it on. Why not? We'll keep going with it. Let's go over a quick kind of no-brainer things for me that I should have explained right before I did all that nonsense. I have both segment tools activated. So one thing I'm going to want to make sure is when both are active, if I'm trying to use the splice in tool to drag clips around, that I am going to the bottom half, not the top half, the bottom. I want to activate that yellow arrow, which indicates the splice in tool. Additionally, if I drop a clip within an existing segment, so if I'm moving this walking clip and I'm dropping it into this slow fingers walk clip, I should be aware that it's going to split that clip into 2 parts, and the shot that I'm dragging is essentially, like I said, it's splitting it into 2 parts. So we can see on the far left, those fingers dragging, that's going to be, now the video is essentially cut in half, and I've put my video in the middle. And then the third thing is if you drop a segment at an edit point between 2 shots, it's essentially just swapping the positions thereof. So if one thing I'd want to do here is hold command. Another thing that I talked about in the last lesson, but holding command will make sure that I park this clip right at the old starting frame of that R8 1/112 slow finger shot, and then I've essentially swapped the location thereof. I can let go and be confident that there won't be flash frames. So make sure you're holding control or command when you're dragging around if you're just trying to rearrange them within the sequence. Again, making sure that it's yellow when you're moving it around. Let's move into using the link selection toggle. Another useful timeline option is the link selection toggle. It's the key to using the segment tools efficiently. So during input, Media Composer creates link associations between your audio and your video segments from the same source media. So if I go to my video files and I load this one in Source Monitor and I drag it into my timeline, you can see I've got both my video and my audio. They're linked. So now I've got that in my timeline. If you activate the link selection toggle button in the timeline palette, Media Composer will auto-select a video clip's associated audio segment when you click the video segment. Moving, trimming, or deleting the video segment affects any linked audio segment as well. So what did I just say? When I click this, the associated and linked audio file will click with it. So if I start editing this and moving things around, this audio, which is linked to it, will automatically be affected as well. So because this is a function that helps us maintain sync, but if we wanted to independently edit linked audio or video segments, we could disable the link selection toggle button before selecting a segment. This is the link selection toggle button. So let's select nothing. Let's be selected on nothing. I'm going to select the link selection toggle button, and I'm going to turn it off. Now it's off. It's muted. If I click it again, it'll be on. If I click it again, it'll be off. So now that it's off, when I go to select this clip, you can see it doesn't select the associated audio. So if I just wanted to move my walking clip around for some reason and leave my audio clip behind, I could do that. So boom, now I've moved it and sync is broken as far as that goes. This can be really helpful when you want to edit audio bits, or if you wanted to adjust B-roll and things like that. But with the link selection toggle off, you can still select multiple segments by selecting one and then shift clicking an additional one. So let's say I still wanted to move these together. I could select them like that, and now they're moving together, but weirdly. I could also I could select this one and this one and this one, and I can move all three of these at the same time. So I could be selecting multiple clips and moving them. So this could be helpful if you, again, had a montage. I had a big montage here, and I said, I think these three shots would work better sooner, and then I'll put the other shots later. I'll undo that, though, and I'll leave this the way that it is now. By default, you can quickly turn on and off the link selection toggle by pressing Shift-L on your keyboard. This is easy to remember because L for linking. So if I hit Shift-L, we can see that toggle turn back on right here. I'm going to hit it again. Shift-L, Shift-L, Shift-L. If you start moving stuff around, this is a great reference. If I'm like, oh, I want to move this walking whatever with this and that at the same time, and I select it and I start moving, and I get both clips, that's great. You should be paying attention to this stuff. If I click it and I go to move it and only one moves, you should be thinking about this stuff. You go, oh, what's wrong here? Why isn't this moving with my other one? Your link selection toggle is probably disabled. So good note there for going forward. Now let's talk about moving audio segments. The red lift and overwrite tool combines lift and overwrite functions. You'll use this tool to reposition segments without affecting other clips, or to replace one segment with another. Since everything in the sequence stays locked in place as you move a segment to its new location, lift and overwrite is the perfect tool for adjusting narration timing under a montage. To move audio segments, we're going to activate the lift and overwrite button. We could click here and we could just select red, that's the lift and overwrite button, and then click again, make sure it's highlighted so it's selected. Or we could be GigaChads and we could be using both at the same time. And just remember, when we're here, gotta make sure it's active, when we're here in our timeline, that it is on the top half. You must click the top half of your track or your segment, whether it be audio or video, to accomplish this with overwrite. So then we'll click and drag the audio segment to its new location, and then we'll release the clip. So let's move, I like this walking. We'll move this, oh, what's going on? Why am I only moving one? Let's undo that. We'll toggle back on the link selection tool. And then when I click this, when I click it again, we'll see both activate now. Cool. So we will drag it to a new location. If both segment tools are active as a smart tool, like I said, make sure you're clicking on the top. But moving audio clips surrounded by filler doesn't fully demonstrate how the lift and overwrite function works. If we move a clip over an existing clip, what happens? What's going to happen? It's going to overwrite the audio underneath, and it's going to leave space behind from where it was originally. All right, moving segments between tracks. With lift/overwrite, you can easily move segments vertically between tracks without losing sync. So we could be moving these tracks to higher tracks. Let's create a few new tracks. So we can move these tracks with lift and overwrite, which is red, without breaking sync. So let's take this track here, and we'll pull it up, and we'll drop it. We're still maintaining sync, which is awesome. What about using the extract and splice in? Let's undo this. If I use the extract and splice in function and move this to a different segment, the clips downstream close and we break sync. So now this video's audio is over here, this video's audio is over here. So using the lift and overwrite, the red feature, would be the best way to move tracks to different locations. So this would be similar if we were trying to do audio. So say we had our dialogue one for our our protagonist and dialogue 2 for our antagonist. We accidentally put some audio for our antagonist and our protagonist dialogue line. We want to move that down. Let's make a new track. We would want to move that down, making sure we were selected on the lift and overwrite. Now, if you hold Shift, I think Shift Command, it might just be Command. If you hold Command, and go up and down, it will lock it in a vertical orientation. So you can make that easy adjustment there. But again, making sure we're selected on red, lift and overwrite, because splice in is going to close that gap and it's going to break your sync. All right, we have a table here. It includes keyboard shortcuts, and I'm going to put it up on the screen now for you to review. Let's look at some of these functions now with the Shift Control, or Control Shift Drag and Command Shift Command Drag, and the up and down arrow keys. All right, so the table you reviewed includes the move up and down, move clip down move clip functions, and these are mapped by default to the up and down arrows on your keyboard. These hotkeys let you move segments to another track, so you don't have to worry about accidentally. Let's say we want to adjust this one and we're going to lift it and I slid a little bit. We don't have to worry about it. I could just make sure I'm selected on it, and then I could just hit the up arrow and then it'll move that automatically. If we come down here and hover over, we can move this one independently as well. If you wanted to subvert all this stuff and highlighting both at the same time, let's say you just wanted to edit one at a time, it would be back to the link selection toggle here. So I could just click this one and move this one independently. I don't have to highlight both at the same time. Just always remember to turn it right back on once you're done so that you don't forget and leave anything left behind. All right, let's talk now about selecting multiple segments. At times you'll want to move or remove multiple segments in the timeline. You can select multiple clips with either segment mode tool, so it doesn't matter if you're selected on lift and overwrite or extract and splice in. You could be set to the Smart tool. Just make sure that it is highlighted, that it is active. There are two specific ways that are covered in the book. We're going to start with the first one, which is just clicking and then holding Shift, and then you can click whichever ones you want after that. Clicking them again will deselect them, so if I wanted to deselect all these clips, it doesn't matter if it's red or yellow when you click on the first one. Just don't click and move it, because then, you've made an edit. You don't want to be making edits. Remembering that Command Z and Control Z are the undo functions. That's how I'm constantly moving things and then going, don't want that, and then I can hit Command Z. Anyway, so we'll select one, we'll select a few more, and we'll go, yeah, these three will work nicely. Another way we can do it is we can lasso segments. So we can click the gray space above the top video track. So you don't want to click inside, because that's filler. You want to click above in this gray area, and we want to drag and select. Something to note, though, if you just saw, when you lasso drag, if you don't encompass the entire clip, see this third clip? If I don't encompass the entire clip, it won't select it. So you can't just highlight this and think it's going to select. You have to encompass the entirety of the segments you're trying to highlight. So that's one way. We can release the mouse after we drag select. The direction you draw this lasso matters, because if you lasso from right to left, it's going to activate a different tool. This different tool is called the slip trim. It's a function that we'll cover in the next book, so we won't go that way. But if you're trying to select multiple clips at the same time, you're going to need to use lasso left to right. So that is how you select multiple clips. That's two ways to select multiple clips in Avid Media Composer. Just when you think it's over, there's always more ways to do the same thing in Media Composer. Let's look at a few more ways that you can select multiple clips within Media Composer. I actually have a little graph here from the book. We're going to go ahead and look at this, and I'm going to explain each function. So referring to this image, the select left, number 1 is the select left. This selects segments under the position indicator on all segments to the left of the active tracks. So what does that mean? So if I hit this button, if it was mapped to my timeline palette here, my timeline buttons, I could click the button and then it would select all the tracks to the left of my position indicator. This one does the same thing, everything to the right of the position indicator. And then the third button selects a region between in and out marks. So if I set an in mark at the beginning of my timeline or here, and I set an out mark there, it would select these clips within that region. Now, how do we activate these buttons? They are not by default mapped to your palette here. So we'll go ahead and open the command palette by hitting Command 3 or select on Media Composer, Command 3 or Control 3 if you're on Windows. You'll click Edit, and then these buttons are right here. We have to the left, to the right, and select in and out. We're going to make sure button-to-button reassignment is selected, and we're going to drag to the left here. We're going to drag to the right here, tell you what, and then we're going to put the select in and out in the middle, just because I like the way that looks better. Cool. And let's try some of these functions. So position indicators in our timeline, I'm going to set it right here. I'm going to select to the left, and we're going to get all the media to the left. Now, why is it selecting this, which is way beyond the right? Because this is an empty filler track, and that's all that's within this track. If we slide to the beginning and the ends on this bar, we can see that, so if I deactivate these tracks, it won't select that media, that material. So it will only select the tracks that you have selected. So let me deselect. So let's say I only want to pick up tracks that are on A1 from the right. I can click from the right, and boom, it will get those audio tracks only on the A1 track, down and around. And then let me display the in and out. So I'll mark an in, pressing I on the keyboard, and an out right here. And then, it's selected because we only have that selected. Let me deselect that. Let me set, so I have my in and out set, and then I can activate the tracks that I want to select. Why is it selecting? It's selecting because that's the region between the in and outs. And then I can just hit this button, and it will actually select the clips that land within the in and out. So even though this in isn't perfectly before this clip, it's still selecting this clip because it's assuming I want to access this media as well. So we've mapped these to the keyboard. I've showed you how to do that, and you can do that on your editing interface as you want. And remember, when I make edits like this to my palette, to my timeline, these are user settings. These are saved in my user settings, and these are customized to my Avid user account. So I can go ahead and save, make sure I'm saving all these changes. I can click my bin container menu and hit Command S, and that will save my whole project yet again. And my user settings. My user settings will also be saved. Let's look at some useful tools that Media Composer has that's going to make your life a lot easier. So Media Composer includes several tools you may find useful as you work through its lessons and exercises and throughout your general editing process. First is the clip name menu. As you edit, you may need to return to a clip you recently worked with. So instead of searching for it in your bins, you can quickly reload it in the source monitor via the clip name menu. Up here is the clip name menu. This is the clip name menu. So it's going to have by default the last 20 or so shots that you've loaded into the source monitor. So you can recognize the name of whatever it was you were working on. If you're doing what you should and you're naming things with proper conventions, we got climbing, feet, edit, we've got slow, chalk. If you're really naming your files, you're going to know exactly what video you're looking for, and you can go ahead and just click and pull it right back up in your source monitor, especially if you want to add different elements of the same clip into somewhere else in your sequence. Next thing we're going to look at is the undo function. I have said this before, but it is a very big one. So if you do something in your timeline and you didn't mean to do it and it now has ruined everything, you can just hit Command Z or Control Z as many times as you want. Alternatively, you can go up to Edit. Oh, I'm going to undo that. You can go up to the, why is it selecting? Oh, because I've got a region selected. Alternatively, if you want to undo something, you can go up to Edit and then Undo, Clear in and out. But there's also Redo. A redo has its own keyboard shortcut as well. That is Control R or Command R. If I hit Command R, if I selected my timeline, Command R, it should be redoing things, but it's not. So it's probably because I undid so many things. Sometimes you'll need to undo a series of actions rather than just one or two. So to save time, you can leverage Media Composer's undo/redo list. To undo a series of actions, you can go to Edit up here, and then we can do undo dash redo list, and we've got all these options here. Now it says here on the book that your sequence reverts to the past point in history. This is something you should remember, that if you look at this list and you go, oh, here's the list of things I want to do. I just want to undo this one function I did 8 steps ago or 9 steps ago. It's going to undo all the functions that you did since then. So you can't think that you can just undo an action at a specific time frame. No, it's going to undo all the actions clear till that point. So I couldn't do a bunch of edits in my timeline and think I could undo one edit that I had already done. So it's got quite a robust list there. There's up to 100 recent actions that you can undo through that menu. So that's a great feature. Let's say 100 actions. That could be, that could be anywhere from 2 minutes of work to 20 minutes of work, depending on what you're doing. So being able to undo all that is very valuable. Okay, quick note here before we move on though. If you change sequences or close your project, that undo/redo list will be cleared. That information will be lost. So if I come up here to my sequences and I open up a different sequence, my timeline changes and my undo and redo list has disappeared. So keep that in mind. If you're really serious about undoing an action, don't change sequences first or close your project, obviously. Let's talk now about another useful tool, duplicate. As you edit, you'll most likely want to create multiple versions of a sequence. For example, you might need multiple versions to meet multiple delivery requirements or submit different angles for maybe a news story or just general dailies. You can also use versions to track sequences evolution throughout the editing process. So while you're going along, you're making those duplicates, and you can always revert back to one of those older versions just in case you went too far and didn't like what you made. You could always revert back. But after all, not every idea is brilliant, so you'll want to have those earlier versions on hand should you need them. So to duplicate in Media Composer, there's 2 ways to do it. We can duplicate the sequence we're working on by right-clicking in the record monitor, that's this guy here, and then we can simply hit duplicate. And then it's going to want us to select a target bin or from whatever bins we have open, and we'll go ahead and click OK. We can see it's created a new sequence, and by default, it's going to make a new name convention that includes .copy.01. What we could do is just change this to V2 or version 2. I think I already have another name convention. Just make sure you're in order. I'm not being in order. Make sure you're organized, not in order. I'm not being super organized with this, so we'll say version 22 just to be funny, but we'll leave that there. But now we have a duplicated version of the sequence, our Rock Climber promo version 2. This is a great function, and this is a great tool, especially if you have a project and you're like, it's not bad, but something's missing. Something about this project isn't there. So you can just make a duplicate and not have to worry about loading up a bunch of space on your drive. Every one of these duplicates is just metadata. It's negligible in the storage department. So it's just code. It's just using the source media that's referenced already to make different versions of your content, your assets. So you don't have to worry about, like I said, using up your drive space. You can just say, you know what, I'm going to make a duplicate. I'm just going to start rearranging everything, and I'm going to make this exactly the way I want. And I highly encourage you to do that. Edit your whole project and then reevaluate and go, let's start over fresh. Let's make a new version, and I can have a completely separate version because oftentimes your first idea isn't always your best. So, yes. And don't forget that duplicating a sequence obviously leaves your previous version intact. But again, it does clear your undo and redo history. So if I made a duplicate of my sequence, it's going to automatically, load that sequence, that duplicate, into our timeline. That will be what we're working on now. We won't be working on the old version anymore. We'd be working on the duplicate. And also, our redo and undo list would be reset. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. All right, you also might want to do it to create backups and other things. And another thing, if you want to subvert the problem of refreshing your redo list, like deleting all that, you could simply come directly into the bin where your sequences are stored. You could select one and you could hit Command D, and that would make a duplicate as well. I'm going to undo that though. Well, I'm just going to delete that. I don't need this extra sequence. Oh, why did I hit that? Delete sequence. Okay, so I can just delete that. But if, again, you don't want to refresh your undo list by clicking in here and making a duplicate, you can always make a duplicate directly in your bins. All right, sweet. Let's talk now. One more tool that's super useful is 2 rows of buttons. So we have all these buttons here in our Composer window under our source and record monitors. If you prefer to use buttons to activate Media Composer features, you can add a second row of buttons whenever you want. And the way to do that would be to access the Composer settings window. So you will right click in here, we'll go to Composer settings. You can also come up to the top and go Composer and then settings. But we're going to start here. And then you can see right here, buttons display at bottom. We can just set this to 2 rows. And I can click OK. And now we have a second whole set of buttons. And I could open the command palette if I wanted, Command 3, and I could be mapping all kinds of buttons there as well. So you have all kinds of customization options here right in Avid Media Composer. Very, very awesome. So now let's move on to changing shots in the sequence. Your first choice for a shot won't always be the right one. Fortunately, you can use the lift/overwrite tool to replace existing segments in your sequence or add clips to tracks above current material. The latter technique is useful for creating cutaways, for viewing alternative shots. So instead of replacing a shot, we could highlight this and then load in a different shot and replace it, which we're going to learn how to do in a second. Or alternatively, you could just make a new track. I'm hitting Command Y to make a new track. And I could just load a shot into the source monitor, set my in and my out, and then I could drag this shot. Oh, I don't want the audio. Hold on. I will turn off the A1 audio source. So when I drag this, I'll just get video. And I can move that to the spot that I'm looking for. And that will not damage this video content. We'll still hear what we're supposed to, but we'll see this kind of cutaway, this B shot up top here instead. And because Media Composer views everything from the top down, so we're in good shape there. We'll remove this though, and we won't be doing that. So I'll disable this V2 track, and let's just delete this because we won't need this. So let's talk now about replacing that shot. To replace a shot or a portion of a shot in your sequence, you can mark in and out points in the timeline to tell Media Composer which shot or portion of shot you want to replace. So to make things snappy and quick, I can park my position indicator over a specific shot. Let's make sure our track selector's on. I can park it here, and then I can just hit U, and I can hit T, and then T will automatically mark this clip. So we're aiming to remove or replace this clip right now. We'll find a replacement clip by loading it into the source monitor. So we'll say, okay, we don't want this climbing shot, we want a different climbing shot. We'll load this climbing shot in. We'll play it. We'll set our ins. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we'll set, yes, in the source monitor, we'll set an in mark where we want the replacement content to start. And then in the timeline, we can activate the source track screen where we want it to go, which we do want it to go to the V1, replace the V1 content, and ensure we're set to the only lift and overwrite tool. So right now we're set on the segment tool. We're going to set this to only lift and overwrite. Sweet. And then we can click the source monitor image and drag that down to where this other thing is that we're trying to replace. See how it's copying more content than we were aiming for? If I hold Command, it's going to snap within that in and out region I set earlier. It's going to match the frame amount required. So holding Command or Control is going to accomplish that. Then I can just drop and let go, and we have instantly replaced that shot with what we wanted. Now, I accidentally changed the audio. Let's say I had an interview rolling underneath, and I wanted to keep that interview. I'll undo this, and what I'll do is I'll just not highlight A1, and I can drag this in. And the same thing, hold Command, and I can snap this in between my in and out marks that I set, and it will restrain it to exactly what we're looking for. So now the shot has been replaced within. So there you go. That's one way to do it. We can clear our marks in the timeline by pressing G again. That'll take away those in and out marks that we had set. Cool. Awesome. Let's move on now to creating cutaways. So when working with talking head footage like interviews, you can add shots to show what the subject is talking about. These B-roll shots, also known as cutaways, heighten the audience's experience. If we're just watching a plain interview with this dude sitting on a rock, doing multiple takes, fumbling over his words, it's going to be very boring. So we can chop this up. We can take all the best sound bites and the best clips of his interview, throw it into the timeline, and then go, okay, well, let's add a B-roll. So we'll do Command Y. We'll create a new track. And in this new track, we'll have those cutaway shots. So we'll be editing those right on top of his interview without disrupting it. So in Media Composer, you'll want to overwrite cutaways to V1. This helps maintain simple sequence structure. So if we wanted to, we could do it directly onto the V1. If you're coming from an app that encourages adding cutaways to a second layer, or you find the idea of adding cutaways to V1 confusing, no problem. So adding cutaways to B-roll to V2 works just fine. So let's get into how that works. So to add a cutaway to the V2 layer or the V2 track, we're going to right-click the timeline, and we'll go to, we can create a new video track if we want. We could do new video track, or you could do Command Y like I did. So we already have our new video track. We can load our B-roll into the source monitor. So a cutaway shot. I've been using this one a lot, so let's use something else. We'll use this one walking. And then in the timeline, we'll activate and patch the source tracks where we want them to go. So we'll make sure we're using this cutaway. We don't want the audio, so we'll deselect the source audio. So when we bring this in, we'll only get the video. In the timeline palette, we'll ensure that the lift and overwrite tool is selected. Same thing. Make sure we're going to be all red here. And then we're going to click and drag from the source monitor image and then drop to the desired location on the V2 track. All right. Oh, I didn't set in and outs on this. That was a mistake. Quick note, if you hold your track that you're bringing into your timeline and you hold it at the top and you hold it up, it will create a new track. So I've gone back down, but if I go up, it'll make another track just in case that's what I wanted to do. That is not what I want to do, so I'm going to undo all the stuff that I just did. Let me set my in and outs on this track because I forgot to do that. So set a quick in and out here. Maybe shorter. We'll do it now there. So now we have a cutaway, and we can just drag. That's a really long shot. Gee whiz. We will make this significantly shorter then. Bring this cutaway in. There we go. That's a more reasonable size. And again, I only selected the V1, so we're only getting video for this cutaway, and we'll go ahead and just drop her right here. Cool. So now we have this new cutaway inserted onto a second track for ease and enhancement of our interview. If we had an interview, I clearly don't have an interview going on. There's just music. If the B-roll segment on V2 wins the audition, you can use the lift and overwrite tool to move that shot down to V1 to ensure the segment doesn't shift left or right later when we're adding or splicing in material. So we can hold Control Shift on Windows or Command Shift on Mac while dragging the segment down. So if I hold Control and Command and drag it down, it's going to insert it directly into that V1 track, and we don't have to worry about keeping it on the V2 track anymore if this is the finalized version of what we're looking for. If you prefer to use the 3-point editing technique to add the cutaway above the video on V1, you need to add V2 before clicking the overwrite button or the B key. So again, you're going to want to make sure you add the necessary elements before you start adding to your new track. You got to have it all set up, making sure you are set to the overwrite tool. All right, let's start getting into deleting from the timeline. What if you add material to your sequence that you decide to remove later? This section introduces you to deleting unwanted material with the extract and splice in / lift and overwrite segment modes. So I've been saying lift and overwrite. I've been saying extract and splice in. What does this mean? Let's talk about it. To delete a segment using the extract and splice in, you're going to enable and select the yellow extract and splice in button in the timeline palette. So we're going to switch over here now back to yellow. We'll turn off red. Again, you could be using the Shift A and Shift S keys on your keyboard to do that without coming up here and clicking. You'll click the segment we want to delete, so making sure this is highlighted and active, we can click the segment, and then we'll press the backspace, Windows, or delete key on Mac on the keyboard, and that will remove it essentially. Delete with the extract and splice in moves downstream content to the left. So if we clicked this piece here and I hit delete, sorry, why isn't this working? If I hit delete, there we go. Now it's going to move stuff back. And as you can see, Media Composer removes the segment from the timeline and closes the gap. So if you adjusted an audio segment's clip gain and tried to delete the segment, the gain adjustment gets removed first. So that's what happened. Just then when I hit delete, it didn't do anything, or it seemed like it didn't do anything. What actually deleted the adjustment I made to the audio levels in the clip gain before it actually deleted. So that would be, see this little clip gain button? If I tried to hit delete on this, it would first delete any clip gain adjustments I made, and then if I hit delete again, it would remove it. To remove a segment and clip gain in one fell swoop, use the extract functions or the scissor icon feature we used in lesson 3. So if we just wanted to remove this entirely, I could just select it, and then we could hit this extract, or we could hit X on the keyboard, and that would delete that in one fell swoop. So we'll leave that there. To avoid breaking sync, though, we can use the link selection toggle button to delete both audio and video simultaneously. Deleting a video only segment, if that's what you want to do, you can use the lift and overwrite tool, and we're going to describe that now. So let's look at how to remove with the lift and overwrite tool. To do this, if necessary, you're going to need to click the segment mode button, and we're going to switch this back over to red. Sorry, I was holding control. So now it's back onto red. Now we're on the lift and overwrite, and then we're going to enable the track by selecting it with what we want to remove. So we'll click this bad boy here. And then we can also hit the backspace or delete button to remove this. And if we, now it deleted a clip gain adjustment, we'll delete it again. And the difference between this and extract, closed the gap, lift, removed, and left a gap. So now we have this filler left behind. So the filler appears and the gap is created. So if you configure the segment mode tool with both active, so if we switch this to having both active, the default segment tool setting in timeline settings, edit tab, dictates how the delete segment will work. So I believe by default it is set to lift and overwrite. So let me check that. Let me fact check that, making sure this is enabled. I'll click this and I can hit delete. Tell you what, maybe it works if I hit delete. Well, no, I would have to delete something in the middle of, here, I'll try this. I'll try clicking it with yellow and then hitting delete. Nope, it is by default set to the lift function. So keep that in mind when you are deleting stuff from your timeline. I'm going to undo all those actions I just did so that we can restore our timeline roughly back to where we had it. Okay, cool. Let's slide on over to adding cuts now. As you edit, you may decide to remove a portion of a segment in a sequence instead of the whole clip. To achieve this with the segment tools, you'll use the add edit function to divide the segment and delete the part that you don't want. Here's how you would accomplish that. So first, you're going to move the timeline position indicator to the spot that you want. So then maybe let's say, what's going on here? Why aren't we seeing it? Oh, because I turned off the picture. All right, so let's move what we got here. Let's see. We're going to make it cut at some significant point. So let's make it cut as soon as his knee makes contact right there. So we'll go, boom. So this is where we're going to want to add our cut. We're going to make sure that the relevant tracks are enabled. So we're going to make sure our V1 track is enabled. And then we're going to navigate up to the Add Edit button, and we're going to click it. Right here is the Add Edit button. So when I click this, watch right here, watch what happens. Ready? 3, 2, 1. It added a little split. It added an edit to our clip. So now when I remove this part of the video that I don't want, depending on how I remove it, it will jump to the next shot, which is very beneficial. A couple of notes here. Media Composer's add edit function is equivalent to the blade tool in Final Cut Pro and the razor tool in Premiere Pro. So if you've used those, you would be familiar with what we're doing here. Media Composer calls the edit point created by the add edit function a match frame edit. So when you add that add edit, it's called a match frame edit. So you might also hear people refer to it as a through edit or a false edit. If you accidentally leave tracks active and apply the add edit function by mistake, no worries, we can easily fix that with the following. So if we look here, I did add an edit to this audio and this shot and this filler and this shot. Maybe I just wanted it to occur right here. So let's fix that. So let's deselect our V1 track, and then we're going to do the following. We're going to add in and out marks. So we'll do an in, we'll play, we'll do an out, and now we've selected the region where those add edits occurred. All right, and then we clear in and out points to remove all match frame edits from our enabled tracks, and then go to timeline and remove. So we have to go to timeline, and then we can go down here to remove match frame edits. And when we click this, boom, those match frame edits disappear here at least. But what happened here? Why didn't it remove down here? Well, quick note, you can remove match frame edits only if the clips on each side of the edit are in the same state. For example, with no effects or audio changes. If they are not in the same state, the match frame mark, which looks like an equal signs, will turn red. So we can see down here, it's very small, but there is a little red here. It's a little equal sign. There is an audio adjustment on the right clip from the first one, so it wasn't able to reconnect this match frame, or delete the match frame edit we added here. All right, cool. I hope that's making sense. Let's move on to the next thing. All right, next let's look at changing the length of timeline segments. So far in this lesson, we've explored rearranging, moving, replacing, and deleting segments. Now let's look at how to change segment length within the timeline. For this, you'll be using two trim tools, the overwrite trim and the ripple trim. You can access these tools from the trim type button in the timeline palette right next to the segment mode buttons. Yes, as you guessed, it is this, right next to the segment mode. We've been looking at this a lot. Let's get into it. So there are a few different ways we can configure this. Similar to the segment mode button, we can either enable both to make it a smart tool, so when we hover on the top and bottom it changes function, or we could set it to do one or the other, overwrite trim or ripple trim. I'm going to leave it set to both unless the book tells me to do otherwise. So I think it is better to be working with both on, by the way. I would prefer that you work with both just so that you get in the habit. Even if you do end up picking one or turning one on specifically, like you should still be going, oh, well, when I do this action, I should be coming to the bottom. I should be thinking about coming to the bottom to perform these trims. So anyway, all right. So like the segment mode tool, we can enable both to make it a smart tool, but the cursor's position determines how it's going to affect our stuff in the timeline. So the position of the cursor close to either side of the edit to see the available trim types. So we'll move the cursor down towards the bottom of the track to activate the yellow ripple trim, and we'll move the cursor to the top to activate the overwrite trim. And we'll click either side of an edit and colored trim roller appears. So we'll know what we're working with. So if I come to the bottom of this shot here, if my thing would stop being dumb, it's acting a little bit strange. There we go. If I click, I can see yellow, and I know it's going to be the ripple trim. If I come up here to the top and I click, it'll be red, and I know it'll be an overwrite trim. You can do that on both sides, obviously, of a segment. So ripple yellow and overwrite red. Trim lets you shorten and lengthen segments in the timeline with the mouse. By the way, Media Composer borrowed the term trimming from the film industry. It describes, it's a similar process with cutting celluloid film and things like that. So like the segment tool, the ripple trim tools are color-coded to match their functionality. Yellow indicates the tool will extract or splice in frames depending on the direction you trim in the timeline. Red means the trim tool will lift or overwrite frames, again depending on the direction you trim in the timeline. Let's take a look at both tools though. So let's perform a ripple trim, that's the yellow. So we'll perform a ripple trim first. You'll use the yellow ripple trim tool to lengthen or shorten shots without creating any gaps. This works great during the first pass of a sequence refinement. Let's walk through 2 examples. So first is going to be adding content to our segment and removing content. So first, to add content to our segment, if we have both selected, we're going to make sure we are on the bottom part of a segment. So we see that yellow roller trim up here, and you can go to either side of any segment and you'll get these tools come up. So we can click, and if this shot has available handle, so for instance, real quick, this is a quick note, when you have a shot loaded into your source monitor, if you don't have enough video in front of the in point and enough video on the other side of the out point, you can't actually you can't move it. It will just stop. So let's add this shot quickly to our timeline, so I know I've got one that's going to work. So if I come in here and I go to ripple trim this shot, if I click it, I know I have extra shot. And it's really fancy. It's got this bracket here. It tells me even how much video I have until I do reach the end of the shot. And if I wanted to, I could remove from the shot, so I can make the shot shorter. Additionally, I could go to the other side and I could start adding from the other side, adding and removing from the other side. So I could add a bunch from this side, whatever we may want. We could drop it, we could play through, make sure it's the proper length that we want. It's not. Maybe we need less. We could drag it right back to, and we're Gucci there. We're in good shape. Now, something to notice, what have we done? What have I done? I have broken sync because I did not make sure that all my track selectors were selected. I have this audio down here that has now gone out of sync. It's been messed up with the interview that's going on underneath. So I would need to undo essentially everything that I just did. And if I was going to add anything, I would make sure that all these tracks are selected, because when I start doing this function, it's going to really mess up sync. That's why, again, this is yellow. That's why this function is yellow. You need to be using caution while using it. Awesome. So let's take a look at the other direction, or actually first let's take a quick look at this notification here. You could leverage the add edit feature covered in the deleting from timeline section from this lesson. If you cut too much content and you need to either undo or try again, or you'd perform a ripple trim to add frames back in, and the ripple trim requires less steps. What did I just read? What did I just say? Essentially it's saying if you added an edit, so let's say we clicked the add edit button here, and then we removed this content from our project, we could then just use the roller trim to drag that back out. But as we can see, it's not working quite perfectly. So this might be where the overwrite trim tool works perfectly. We could bring it right back out to where it's supposed to be, and boom, we're happy. We don't have a proper frame. Why don't we have, now we have a flash frame. So if I play this real quick, let's watch it in the record monitor up here. Watch closely, 1, 2, 3. There's a flash frame, it goes to black. Let's undo that. If we hold Option and Command, it will snap to that frame, that last frame, and it will make sure it's a proper and perfect cut, that there won't be any flash frames. So overwrite trim works similarly, but it's a little bit safer than the ripple trim. So with overwrite trim, let's say we wanted to just dig into this other shot, we can do that. And none of this downstream content gets affected by that. That doesn't throw off this audio down here, that doesn't do anything. So it's safer. Even though I don't have A2 selected, I don't have to worry about it modifying all that much. So that's an advantage with the overwrite trim tool. But they both have their place as far as making edits in the timeline. Before we move on, let's look at one more use that we could have for the overwrite trim tool. So sometimes we have narration that we want to keep going, or it gets cut off too soon. The overwrite trim tool is a great tool for this because as we click on it, we don't necessarily have to worry about ruining everything. Again, it's just going to be editing almost within its region. It's not going to destroy the downstream content over here. But when you are doing a quick little audio edit here, when we are adding more, let me undo those changes. You are going to make sure if you want to do like a J cut or an L cut, that your track selector or your link selection toggle is off. So if we turn off the link selection toggle, and then I go to perform this edit, they were still selected on both. Let me undo that. Let me turn off. It is still selected. There we go. When I go to drag this out now, it's going to drag out only this. So I can extend this little interview or whatever this may be, this audio bit. Let's say I wanted to shorten it. I could shorten it, and then so we could go in either direction with this. A very useful function. So let's hit play and see how that sounds.
To meditate, to think about what I'm about to do as I get to the rock.
I don't know what it was like before, but I know I changed it. So that would be a quick way to add J and L cuts. You have your shots. They're already rolling the way you want them to. You could come in here and be editing the audio, similar to like an audio interview or whatever. All right, so as expected, the line of narration is moved around, and if we wanted to move it more, it's just going to increase the amount of filler that's in between. So if we wanted to shorten this, we're still going to have this filler in the middle. To move on now to some more terms that you'll want to be aware of when editing. So we have the A side versus B side trims. So far we've referred to shots beginning as the head and the end as the tail when trimming. Editors refer to two shots on either side of any edit point as the A side or outgoing shot, which is on the left, and the B side or incoming shot on the right. So this is the A side and this is the B side when you have an edit in the middle. So trimming the A side is very intuitive. So when we come to the A side and we drag the roller to the left, we're shortening the segment, and the end of the shot is getting earlier. So that cut is the clip is getting shorter and that cut's coming sooner. So we're showing less action. When we drag the roller to the right, we're lengthening the segment and we're revealing more action. So that cut comes later. When performing an A-side trim, all downstream material moves in the same direction you drag. So we always know which way things are going. When performing a B-side trim, it gets less intuitive, particularly when we use the ripple trim. So let's come to the B-side. We'll do a B-side trim. So when we drag the roller to the right, it shortens the segment and the start shot later in the action. So within this segment, the shot starting later, and the content that's downstream is getting tighter. But when we drag the roller to the left, it's lengthening the segment and revealing earlier action, so that shot would occur earlier in the shot. The action would occur earlier in the shot. So that is some quick notes about which side you're working on. Again, A side is the outgoing to this side, and then the B side is the incoming. It's always what we're receiving on the B side. So you may become confused as you trim for the first few times. This is completely normal. Just be patient and remember undo/Command-Z or Control-Z is your best friend. Since trimming is such a crucial storytelling feature in Media Composer, it's well worth investing the time to master these concepts, to master all the different edits and the roller trims and the overwrite trims and these functions. All right, let's keep moving on with more trim tools. We have the dual roller trim. Let's explore the white icon that often appears when you hover near a cut point. So when we hover in the middle, we see this white guy. What's this white guy? This icon represents the dual roller trim and appears regardless of which trim tool is active. So we could have just one of these active, and we would still see that white dual roller trim appear. So you'll use the dual roller trim to adjust cut points timing in the timeline. For example, what if you want to adjust an edit point so the video doesn't cut at the beginning of a word? So we would use the dual roller trim to change the timing of this cut point, or any cut point really. So we'll activate the dual roller trim button with either the ripple trim, overwrite trim, or both enabled. So we'll enable both because that's what I said we would be doing. Real quick, I'm going to unmute this track. All right, we'll make sure our different tracks are selected as well. Let's go to this cut point instead. So when we click on it, we see both sides turn pink, and this represents the fact that the dual roller trim is active, that we're editing both sides at the same time. So when we hover over the cut point, we see the white. When the white dual roller icon appears, we'll click. Notice the two pink rollers, like I just said, and then we'll drag to the right to move the cut point later, or to the left to move the cut point earlier. To the right, to the left. So we are moving the cut points between this shot. So what's happening if you're performing a dual roller trim by dragging forward to the right? Media Composer lengthens the outgoing A side shot, so this left side, which is the outgoing shot segment, while simultaneously shortening the incoming B side segment by the same number of frames. Conceptually, the A side rolls over the B side content, the cut point moves forward while downstream segments stay in place. So we're seeing that everything down over here is not moving as we move these cuts, and we can see in the top left we have the outgoing footage and the incoming footage on the right. And we can even see, oh, I didn't mean to deselect. We can even see the number of frames right there in the middle. At the bottom, we can see how many frames we're moving back and forth between each shot. Negative going to the left on the A side, and positive going to the right on the B side. Cool. So if you do the opposite, use the dual roller trim to move the cut point earlier in time, Media Composer shortens the outgoing A side. So we're shortening the outgoing A side segment while simultaneously lengthening the B side at the same number of frames. This time the B side is rolling over the A side content, the cut point moves back in time, and all downstream segments still stay in place. You can also use the dual roller trim to create split edits. You'll do this when you want synced video and audio to cut at different times. For example, cutting to B-roll video before an interview subject finishes speaking. So to create split edits, if active, disable the link selection toggle in the timeline palette. So it is already disabled. Otherwise, if we were editing something that had similar start time, so if I enabled this and started doing the dual roller trim, it would be doing all kinds of stuff. But we're going to deselect it so that we can perform a split edit. When we perform that split edit, we're going to be moving either the audio left or right or the video left or right. Okay, so to create a split edit, if active, disable the link selection toggle in the timeline. Check, we are disabled. Then we're going to hover over the cut point we want to move and click the white dual roller trim. When it appears, we're going to click when we see the white icon appear. And then we'll drag to the right if we want the video cut after the audio, known as a J cut. So if we move it over here, this is going to be a J cut. And if we want it to be an L cut, we'll move it to the left. So that way our video changes and then the audio changes with it, or we can have the audio start and then the video change. J cuts and L cuts. Awesome. I'm going to set that back to the proper position that it was at. As I just showed, you can use the dual roller trim to create split edits where synced video and audio cut at different times, and all downstream audio and video segments stay in place. By the way, synced audio and video that cut at the same time, that's just known as a straight cut. So when we have something like this, that's just a straight cut. When we move it to the right, we've got a split cut.
The approach to the route,
I'm going to try and move it the other direction, see what kind of impact we get.
Just addicting. The approach to the route.
Yeah, so we've got different opportunities there. So before performing a dual roller trim to create a split edit, you'll want to perform a ripple trim on the A side and or the B side of the edit to adjust the pacing and timing. It's not going to just be perfect. When you come in here to do a dual roller trim, when you're trying to adjust a point, so let's play this.
Is one of the bigger things that capture me.
So if I wanted to make a split edit here, I could just move this over to the side. It's not always going to be perfect.
Is one of the bigger things that capture me into rock climbing.
So that wasn't a bad example. that was a bad example because it worked, but alternatively, you would want to make sure you're doing those ripple trims to make sure you've got the content that you really want, and then you could start adjusting the dual roller trim to get the perfect split edit. You should be looking at both sides. Okay, so before we move on, I want to do a quick review here about all these different trim functions. So I want you to, this is just a quick quiz for yourself. As I click and this cut gets highlighted, I want you to tell me out loud, I'm not going to hear you, but tell me out loud what we're looking at. So first, what is this? This is an overwrite trim on the A side. This is a ripple trim on the A side. This red line is an overwrite trim on the B side. Come on. This is a ripple trim on the B side. This is a dual roller trim, which affects both the A and the B side. All right, I hope you got that because I'm going to quiz you on that, so be prepared for that. All right, let's move on to using sync locks. As you've learned, the ripple trim tool moves all downstream material in a track. If you use the ripple trim tool on audio or video alone, you risk breaking sync. Thankfully, Media Composer includes a feature to help prevent this. To ensure shots stay in sync while using ripple trim, you can use the sync lock feature in the Timeline's track selector panel. To do this, for specific tracks, click the sync lock button for each track you want to lock together. These little slants are the sync lock buttons. So if you prefer to sync lock all tracks, you can do all tracks with one click, with just one click on the sync lock all button in the TC1 track. So if we hit TC1, that's going to sync lock all our tracks together. Okay, so how do the sync lock features work? How does this feature work? Let's find out. So let's do a video only ripple trim with sync locks off. So our sync locks are off and we're going to perform a video only ripple trim. So if I move this to the right, we're going to see sync break, and it says we're broken. We're going to see these white numbers appear, and we know that sync has been broken. Sync locks are essentially going to fix this. So the video only ripple will cause these downstream clips to move back to the left, and the corresponding audio tracks. If I had gone the other directions, it would have made it go left. So we would have had sync broken the other direction as these downstream clips move. Now we're at -13. So corresponding audio clips stayed in place, resulting in broken sync. Again, white numbers. So let's look at the same video only trim with sync lock buttons enabled. So let me undo this. So if we get this back to the way that it was originally, if we hit sync locks here and in a few other places, we'll go A1 and A2 as well. Then when I perform another ripple trim, we'll go to the left again. We can see that the downstream content is moving with it and sync is being maintained. Same thing if I went left to right, that we're not messing up our project anymore. Awesome. So I'll let go of that and then I'll pause. I'll stop here for a second. The result, downstream audio moves with the video and maintains sync. Not stink. That means that sync lock features prevent broken sync, which is convenient because breaking your sync ruins your video. That said, like many automatic features, you can introduce other changes as well. It can also introduce other challenges. So that's why we invest considerable time spotlighting functions that can throw you and your sequence out of sync. And we show you how to manually prevent this. So Avid is trying to teach us how to maintain sync at all times, and these sync lock buttons can help tremendously. I mean, on top of making sure our tracks are activated, there's so much to this. So let's see. Sync locks can create unwanted gaps in clips. For example, if you activate sync lock button for music tracks and splice in a video clip, the music track will split at the insertion point, and the music segment to the right of the split will move forward in time. So there are parts of this there are aspects to sync locks that don't always work. So finally, many features you can disable, like sync lock trim rollers if you don't like them. So you can, if you don't like the way that this is affecting your project, you don't need to have these on. You don't need to edit this way. But trying to be caught up with all the different features is obviously better than not being. So to disable sync lock trim rollers, while in trim mode, right-click the composer window. So we're in trim mode, we can click the composer window. And then we will go to trim mode settings. And then in the trim mode settings dialog box, we'll click features. And then under features, we're going to deselect the sync rollers for sync locked tracks. So we can go ahead and deselect this button, and then we can click OK. So if we wanted to disable these hindrances, we can. Okay, let's move on to exploring the trim mode. So we have different modes in Avid Media Composer. So if you've used trim tools before, and we just did a bunch, you may have noticed that clicking an edit point with a trim tool changes the composer window layout. That's because anytime you click an edit point with a trim tool, Media Composer enters trim mode. And when you click the timecode ruler or timecode track to navigate to a new location, you exit trim mode and return to editing mode known as source record mode. Trim mode includes features to keep and help you finesse your sequence with precision. So let's take a closer look at the edit or the trim mode interface. Number 4, we have the trim buttons. Click these buttons to perform a trim, so we can use the left arrow and right arrow on your keyboard. This is actually comma and period. These trim buttons trim one frame at a time. We can also use the M key and the / key trim buttons, and this will do 1/3 a second increments, depending on your projects. That can, for a 30 frame per second project, 1/3 a second would be 10 frames. For a 24 FPS project, that would be 8 frames. So keeping that in mind. And then number 5, we have trim counters. They indicate the direction and number of frames you trimmed on each side of an edit, the A side and B side. Negative value equals trim to the left. A positive value equals trimmed to the right. Number 6, we have the play loop button. Plays a loop around the edit point, allowing you to focus on the edit point you're currently trimming. And then quick note on that, the play button on the keyboard, the space bar and 5 key convert to a play loop in the trim mode. So once you're activated in the trim mode, when you're trimming something, the space bar automatically becomes that play loop button. Number 7, we have the trim mode toggle button. So you'll click this, or you can use the U key to activate or deactivate trim mode. And then number 8, we have trim rollers. This indicates the trim type, the active tracks, and the side you're trimming. So just before this, I did that quick little quiz on what was going on, what were we doing. If we look at this, we've got pink on both sides. What does that mean? It means this edit is a dual roller trim. If it was red on one side, we would know that it was an overwrite trim. If it was yellow on one side, we'd know it was a ripple trim. If it was on the right side, we would know it was a B trim. If it was on the left side, we'd know it was an A trim. Please do master that kind of information. So, entering and exiting trim mode. Let's move on now. So, as you've discovered throughout this course, you can often get to choose how to execute a command or a function. Trim mode is no exception to this. So that means you have choices besides clicking and edit with a trim tool. So first up, we'll enter trim mode by doing the following. We'll click the trim mode button. Media Composer enters trim mode. The position indicator jumps to the nearest edit point, and trim rollers appear on all enabled tracks. So what is trim mode? Again, the trim mode button, the quick button to get to trim mode, is U on the keyboard. So Media Composer enters trim mode, and the position indicator again jumps to the nearest edit point. You can also activate trim mode by using lasso. If you click and drag through an edit point in the timeline, Media Composer enters trim mode at that edit and activates the tracks within the lassoed region and deselects all other tracks. So that would be another way to enter trim mode. The key to a successful lasso is to include the entire tracks in the lasso. So you have to make sure again that you're gathering all that you want within that edit. So completely lassoing both the V1 and A1 active trim rollers on those tracks would be the way to accomplish that. You can also lasso middle tracks in the timeline by holding Alt or Option while lassoing an edit point. For example, if you lasso the A1 and V1, A1 and A2 track configurations, you could edit the cut there. When you exit trim mode, though, you return to source record mode and the default editing mode you've used to review source clips and build your sequences. So we know that this source record mode is the pretty standard view that we're used to. To exit trim mode, though, you can click the trim mode button. So Media Composer exit trim mode and leaves the position indicator at the cut point where you left off. You can click anywhere in the timecode track, so TC1, or you can click to the timecode ruler. The position indicator jumps to the spot you click. If you click earlier in time, Media Composer instantly sets you up to play back the content leading up to the trim you just made. I'm sorry, I left this on the screen. I didn't mean to do that. So if we're in trim mode, if I hit U, we'll be in trim mode. If we want to get out of trim mode, we can just click here, and boom, we've exited trim mode. Or we could select somewhere over here in our control panel, in our bins and our composer windows, and we won't necessarily be in trim mode anymore. But the big one is coming up here and moving the position indicator. That breaks that trim mode. So, all right. You can also press one of the following keys, hotkeys on the keyboard. So you know how U activates trim mode. If we hit U, again, it will deactivate trim mode. The Y key to activate the source record mode. So if we're in trim mode and we want to switch to source record mode, we just hit Y. Again, when we're hitting U, we're seeing this bar here change. We're seeing the representative frame values on the A side trim counter and the B side trim counter. We'll get more into the buttons, like we can be trimming right one frame, multiple frames. These are all indicated up here. So let's do a dual roller trim. We're set up for a dual roller trim right now. We can move this trim to the right by clicking this button, and it's moving. We can see in increments of depending on which one you click. So we could be doing one frame at a time. We could be doing multiple frames at a time. We could be going in the inverse. So we have all the options right here on the interface. Cool. Each of the options, as I was explaining earlier, Y and U, can exit trim mode by selecting them again. You could also hit the escape key to exit and enable the source monitor. So if we were in U, we could hit exit, and then we would be activated back to the source monitor. If we hit escape again, I believe it jumps over to the record monitor, and we can jump back and forth just by continually hitting escape on the keyboard. You can see the tracks here are lighting up as I hit escape. So that's one way to exit trim mode as well. Now that you've explored how to enter and exit trim mode, let's look at how you can leverage this powerful feature. Okay, so all the trimming and drag trimming and everything we've been doing has been leading up to this point. We're going to be trimming with buttons or the keyboard. So trimming directly in the timeline with the ripple and overwrite trim tools work well for rough trims. To finesse your trims with precision, you can use the trim buttons either in the interface or on the keyboard. This section walks you through how. So I jumped ahead a little bit when I was explaining some of the buttons in the trim mode, but this is how I would like you to start mastering the trim mode. So I'm just going to follow the book here. So regardless of your goal, you'll follow the same workflow when trimming in trim mode. Enter trim mode and activate track selectors. So we'll press U, making sure we're selected on the program, we'll press U. This will bring us into trim mode. We can tell we're in trim mode because we got these different things. We can see both sides of our edit, the A side, the B side, and we can see these different modifier buttons here. Let me make sure that the correct tracks are selected. So, hey, well, let's go to this edit here. We'll start with this one. All right. So our goal is to we'll do a ripple trim. So enter trim mode. We'll select a side to set up for a ripple trim, overwrite or dual roller trim on the A side, which is the outgoing left monitor, or B side, incoming right monitor, or both default. So let's get in here. Let's do a left, an A side ripple trim, and we're gonna move this edit to the right. That's our plan. So we're gonna decide which direction to fulfill the successful trim, and then we'll perform the trim using and use the playback loop to review it. So to perform this trim, we can either drag it like we've been doing earlier. I'm going to undo that. Or we can use these trim right one frame buttons. We could trim it back if we wanted. Or we could trim it multiple frames at a time. We can trim it 8 frames at a time. And there we are. We have these keys right here for simplicity. If we wanted to, we can also gain experience and increase our workflow by using the buttons. So let me pull up the buttons here. I mentioned this earlier, but the M key, the comma key, the period key, and the / key are these buttons. So if we were performing any kind of trim, so let's switch it to an overwrite trim. Oh, I have to pull that back up. Let's get that back up here. If I was going to go left or right, it would be the same thing. This here is the exact same map here on your keyboard. It's showed here as well. So if I wanted to go backwards, we could use the M. We could be jumping back. If I wanted to use 1 frame at a time, we could go forward. I could go 1 frame backward. And this is M, comma, period, and /. So all useful functions there. We could do the same thing with the dual roller trim. We could use these same exact keys to accomplish the same things. This is I'm hitting M over and over and over again. I could be hitting it forward with the /. It's all very useful, and especially if you're trying to get very precise trim. If I wanted him to say exactly one thing, you'd be like, oh, and he starts there. And you're going to be using this in tangent with the space bar. So when I hit the space bar in trim mode, it automatically converts it to playback loop. So if I hit space bar now,
I really appreciated my stuff. So it's really cool to be supported.
So I can see sync is broken here because I didn't actually select the audio as well when I did my dual roller trim. But I think you understand what I'm trying to say. If I had both these, if I had put my sync locks here on, or made sure I was selected on my A1 as well, then I would have properly been editing these both at the same time. So that would have been a nice thing to do if I was trying to fix this, but I didn't. So you understand what I'm trying to say here. Get used to using these keys. These keys will be, I guess you could say, the keys to your kingdom when it comes to working with this. Now let's switch now here. Let's switch to overwrite trim. I'm going to deselect this, so I'm not working with that. And let's do a quick key modifiers you should be thinking about. So to click the A side left monitor, we can press P on our keyboard. So this will switch sides. And if we select left bracket just adjacent to P, we'll switch to dual roller trim, and that'll select both sides. And if we select right bracket, which is right next to left bracket on the keyboard, we'll go to the opposite side. So now we have overwrite trim, and we can switch with the P key and the right bracket P key to either side of our edit, and then we can start using that M and the period and /. We could change edits by just clicking and making it a ripple edit, and same exact keys work here. We can switch to the left, the A side with P, or the B side with right bracket, or we could select the dual roller trim by selecting the left bracket middle key. So those are quick keys that you can use to switch sides. And again, all of the same functions still work. If you're struggling to decide which direction you need to trim, you can visualize which way you would drag the trim roller in the timeline, and that can help you determine which keys you should be pressing. You could also just get in here and start moving things around, and if anything breaks, you can just hit Command-Z and it'll go right back to where you had it before. All right, let's move into one of the final concepts from this lesson, moving between edit points. As you get into the trimming groove, you may want to stay in trim mode and move from edit to edit, making adjustments as you go. You can do this by doing one of the following, and there are 4 of the following. So first we're going to make sure we're in edit mode. So we'll go ahead and press, trim mode. We're going to make sure we do that by pressing U on our keyboard. And then all we have to do is click the next edit. We can click it with whatever ruler we want, and that will keep us in the trim mode. Next thing we can do is click the Go to Previous Event and Go to Next Event buttons. While in trim mode, these buttons move the position indicator and trim rollers to the previous or next edit point, respectively. So that would be these buttons here. If you forgot, go to Previous and Next Event. Awesome. I only have the A1 track selected. If I hit V1 here, then we're going to see both, and we can be jumping between each edit point as we skim along here. Cool. We can also click the Go to Previous, Trim, and Go to Next Trim buttons. While in trim mode, these buttons move the position indicator and trim rollers to the previous or next edit point, respectively. If you're in source record mode, they snap the position indicator to the previous or next edit and then enter trim mode. By default, these buttons are not mapped to the interface, though. You can find them in the Move tab of the Command palette and then map them to the Timeline palette or buttons under the Record monitor. So I love how Avid, the book, tells you you can use these buttons and it will jump between the trim locations, and then it says, oh, by the way, these aren't activated by default. So what you have to do is hit Command 3 or Control 3 on your keyboard. Then you go to Move, and under Move, you're going to find Go to Previous Trim and Go to Next Trim, and we can map these by default to our different menus. They have them mapped up here in the Record Monitor menu. I'm tempted to put them here in my Timeline menu, and I think what I'll do, because this is my edit space, I'm going to put them in both. So we'll put both options in both places. So now I have the buttons where I want them. If I close this, now I can click these buttons respectively and jump to next and previous edits and so on. And it's jumping wildly because it's looking at track selectors, and I have to be aware of what track selectors are highlighted and which are not. But these buttons are by default mapped to your keyboard. So if you hit the A and S buttons, they are by default mapped to your keyboard. So you don't have to map them to your menu where you can see them. You can just, again, they're already set up in your keyboard, A and S. Now, if you have track selected, so let's say we have a new track, Command Y, and we have that highlighted. If I hit the Go to Next Trim button, it's going to jump to the end. When we were having this problem earlier, it jumps to the end, and if I hit the button, it's going to switch, it's going to revert back, and then it's going to jump to the beginning because it's trying to look at this track as well. If you hold the modifier key, Alt or Option, depending on which platform you're on, and then hit the S and A buttons, it will ignore whatever track selectors are highlighted, and it won't jump wildly. It can just jump to every single different edit point. So you could be going along your whole project and adjusting every single edit point to make sure that it is the best and most perfectest project that it could ever be. All right. Let's move on now to the final thing for this lesson, scrubbing audio while trimming. Digital audio scrubbing works the same in trim mode as it does in source record mode. To scrub audio while you trim, you can click the Toggle Digital Audio Scrub button. You can solo the track you want to scrub, and you can drag the trim roller or use the trim button keys to perform the trim. So to temporarily engage the digital audio scrub without using the toggle digital audio scrub button, just hold down the shift key while performing a trim. So if we go to U, we go to trim mode, we hit U, and we hold the shift and modifier key and then start performing our trim, we're going to hear audio as it goes, which is very obnoxious. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching this lesson. Don't forget to be getting in the programs, getting in the labs, getting yourself familiar with all these different functions. If you need to watch this video over and over and over again, that's perfectly fine with me. Thanks so much again for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.